Jennifer Anderson ripped the laptop out of Robert Williams's hands. Not asked for it, not requested it. Snatched it the way you'd pull something dangerous away from a child who didn't know better. Her voice came out sharp enough to silence the entire floor. "I don't need your help." Every head turned, every keyboard went quiet. Robert stood there holding his mop in the middle of a billion-dollar building and said nothing. The silence stretched out long enough for people to start looking away, back to their screens, pretending they hadn't just witnessed something uncomfortable. But here's what nobody in that room knew. The laptop Jennifer had just grabbed from him, Robert had already seen something on that screen that was about to bring her entire empire to its knees. Comment below right now. Have you ever been invisible in a room full of people? Have you ever known something nobody else could see? Because what happens next will show you why underestimating the quiet man is the most dangerous mistake you can make. The morning had started the way it always did for Robert Williams, before the sun came up. Not because he was ambitious or had somewhere important to be, but because the janitorial shift at Anderson Technologies started at 5:15 in the morning, and the bus that ran through his neighborhood only came once an hour before 6. So Robert was always early. He didn't mind. Early meant the building was quiet. Early meant the marble lobby wasn't full of sharp-suited people talking loudly into their phones, looking straight through him like he was part of the architecture. Early meant he could do his work, do it well, and feel something close to invisible. In his current life, invisible wasn't a bad thing to feel. He signed in at the security desk. Marcus nodded at him the way Marcus always did, that small acknowledgement between two men who worked hours nobody else wanted. Robert pushed his cart toward the service elevator. The cart was old. The left wheel squeaked. He'd reported it twice to facilities. Both times it got ignored. He'd learned to time the squeak so it didn't bother him anymore. Step, push, squeak, step, push, squeak. A rhythm almost like breathing. The 42nd floor was his assignment today, executive level. Robert hated the 42nd floor, not because it was harder to clean, though it was. He hated it because the kind of people who worked up there had a talent for leaving invisible messes. Coffee rings on glass tables, fingerprints on chrome handles, the faint chalky outline of stress on every surface. He hated it because it reminded him of who he used to be. Robert had not always been a janitor. That was the part of his life he kept folded up and tucked away, like an old letter you can't throw out but also can't bring yourself to read. It sat in the back of his chest somewhere, quiet and heavy, and he'd gotten good at not poking at it. 15 years ago, Robert Williams had been the kind of man people listened to in rooms exactly like the ones he now cleaned. He'd built systems, not the kind you bought off a shelf, the kind you designed from scratch, from pure logic and instinct and a stubbornness that his professors had called problematic and his clients had eventually called invaluable. At 38, he was consulting for 3 Fortune 500 companies simultaneously. That's when he met Rebecca. He was 40 when they married, 42 when Emily was born, 43 when Rebecca got sick, 44 when she died. He was 45 years old, sitting in a hospital waiting room with a sleeping 2-year-old in his lap and a folder full of medical debt in his hand, when he made the decision that had quietly ended his first life and started his second one. He sold the consulting firm. Not because he had to, not immediately anyway. He sold it because Emily needed him present. Not on planes, not on calls at midnight, not staring at a screen while she was learning to walk, learning to talk, learning to be a person in a world that had already taken her mother. He could rebuild the career later. That's what he told himself. Later had not arrived yet. The voice belonged to Donald Taylor from Facilities, a man shaped like a fire hydrant who communicated almost exclusively in complaints. "You're late." Robert checked the clock on the wall without breaking stride. "I'm 4 minutes early. The executive bathrooms on 42 were supposed to be done before the 6 o'clock walkthrough. Anderson's got a board thing today." "I know, I'll get them done. I'm just saying." Robert stopped the cart, looked at him directly. "I'll get them done." Donald muttered something that was probably an insult and shuffled off toward the freight elevator. Robert let out a slow breath through his nose and kept moving. The 42nd floor was already humming by the time he arrived. That was unusual. That was the first sign the day was going to be something other than ordinary. There were people everywhere. Not the slow coffee and handshake shuffle of a normal morning. These people were moving. It guys rolling server carts. Assistants speed walking with tablets. Two men Robert didn't recognize standing near the main conference room, talking in low voices with the kind of body language that meant something had already gone wrong. He pulled his cart to the side out of the way and started on the bathrooms. Kept his head down. That was the other thing he'd learned. Maybe the most important thing. Keep your head down. Do your work. Don't make yourself a story someone tells at lunch. He was halfway through the executive washroom when he heard the voice for the first time that morning. Jennifer Anderson's voice was not a thing you forgot once you'd heard it. It wasn't loud exactly. It was precise, like a scalpel. Thin, controlled, and specifically designed to cut. What do you mean it's still not working? I have 14 people flying in from across the country in 3 hours. Footsteps in the hallway. Then another voice, younger, male, clearly trying very hard not to panic. Miss Anderson, we've had our top 2 engineers on it since yesterday evening. The system architecture is... I don't care about the architecture, Timothy. I care about the presentation that lives on that machine. I care about the board meeting that starts at 9 o'clock. Can you give me either of those things? Silence. That's what I thought. Get me someone who can actually solve a problem. Robert finished the bathroom, loaded his supplies back onto the cart, wheeled quietly out into the hallway. That was when he saw the laptop. It was sitting on a rolling table outside the main conference room. High-end machine. Closed. 3 IT technicians standing around it like it was a patient they'd lost. One of them had a diagnostic tool plugged into the USB port. Another was on his phone. The third was just staring at it with the specific expression of a man who was updating his resume in his head. Robert's cart rolled past them. Squeak. He stopped. Didn't mean to. It was involuntary. The way you stop when you smell something burning or hear a sound that doesn't belong. His eyes moved to the screen that the technician had just opened, running a diagnostic readout. He caught maybe 3 seconds of the output before the lid came back down. 3 seconds was enough. He knew what he was looking at. Not the surface-level malfunction, not the login failure or the presentation file that wouldn't load, whatever the technicians had been chasing for the last 12 hours. He knew what was underneath that. He recognized it the way you recognize a voice on the phone before the person even says their name. There was something running on that machine that wasn't supposed to be there. Something quiet. Something patient. Something that had been placed there deliberately by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The staring technician looked up at him. "You got a problem with the cart?" Robert pulled his eyes away from the screen. "No, just the wheel." "Then keep it moving, man. We're working here." Robert nodded, kept moving. But his mind was not moving. His mind had stopped completely back at those 3 seconds of diagnostic output. And it was running the numbers, tracing the pathways, following the thread to wherever it led. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't finished yet. He was in the middle of restocking the supply cabinet near the east wing when he heard the crash. Not a physical crash. No glass. No impact. The kind of crash that happens when a person runs out of patience entirely, and the sound of it is a voice. "Are you serious right now?" Jennifer Anderson, 30 feet down the hallway, standing over the rolling table with the laptop open in front of her. The 3 technicians had been replaced by 2 different technicians and a man in a suit Robert didn't recognize. None of them looked like they were having a good morning. "The file is corrupted," one of the new technicians was saying. His voice had the flat quality of someone delivering bad news they'd already delivered twice. "We think the initial error caused a cascade. We can have the system restored by this afternoon." "This afternoon?" Jennifer's voice went very quiet. That was worse than loud. Robert had noticed that about her in the months he'd worked this floor. When Jennifer Anderson went quiet, you were in real trouble. "The board meeting is in 2 hours and 41 minutes. This afternoon is a different country." She pressed both hands flat on the table, stared at the screen with an intensity that Robert imagined could have melted the casing if she'd wanted it to. The hallway was very still. That was when Robert's feet started moving. He would think about this later. Lying awake at 2 in the morning, staring at the ceiling of the small apartment he shared with Emily, and he would never be able to fully explain why. Some part of him, some part that had been sleeping for a long time, had simply woken up. He pushed his cart toward the table. "Excuse me." Nobody heard him, or if they did, they chose not to. He tried again, slightly louder. "Excuse me." One of the technicians turned, registered him, looked back at the laptop. "Not now, buddy. I think I can help." That got a reaction. Not a good one. A ripple of something between amusement and irritation moving through the small group. The suited man raised an eyebrow. One of the technicians actually exhaled a short, humorless laugh. Jennifer Anderson straightened up, turned around, looked at him. Robert had been looked at by Jennifer Anderson before. The distant, automatic gaze of someone noting the presence of a service worker, cataloging it, filing it away under irrelevant. But this look was different. This was the look of someone who had been interrupted. "I'm sorry." She said it with a precision that made the apology sound like anything but. "Did you just offer to help?" "Yes, ma'am." "You're the janitor?" "Yes, ma'am." Something moved behind her eyes. Not amusement, not contempt. Something more complicated than either. She tilted her head almost imperceptibly. "With my laptop." "Yes, ma'am." The silence that followed lasted maybe 4 seconds. Felt like considerably longer. "I don't need your help." Her voice was not cruel. It was something colder than cruel. Something that didn't leave room for a response because it had already decided there wasn't one worth giving. She turned back to the screen. Robert stood there for a moment. The suited man was looking at him the way you look at something mildly interesting on the sidewalk. The technicians had already redirected their attention back to the laptop. He should have walked away. He knew he should have walked away. Instead, he said quietly, not pushing, just stating a fact. "There's a process running in the background. It's not the file that's corrupted. The file's fine. It's the authentication layer. And if your IT team doesn't find it in the next few minutes, it's going to take down a lot more than the presentation." Nobody moved. Then Jennifer Anderson turned around again. And this time, the look on her face was something different entirely. It wasn't the cataloging look. It wasn't the dismissal look. It was the look of someone whose brain had just been forced to recalculate. "What did you just say?" "The authentication layer." Robert kept his voice level. "Something's riding on it. It's been running for a while, probably since yesterday based on the load I saw in the diagnostic. It's not trying to crash the system. It's trying to look like the system. That's why your engineers can't find it. They're looking for damage, and it hasn't caused any. Not yet." The hallway was so quiet he could hear the HVAC. One of the technicians, the one who had told him to keep moving earlier, was staring at him with an expression that Robert would have found funny under different circumstances. Jennifer took one step toward him. "Who are you?" "Robert Williams. I clean the executive floor." "I know what you do." Her voice had changed. Still precise, but the temperature had shifted. "That's not what I asked." He held her gaze. Didn't fill the silence with anything he didn't need to say. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the laptop. Then back at him. "Show me." Robert pulled the diagnostic tool from his cart. Not the one the technicians had been using. His own. A small USB drive that looked completely unremarkable. The kind you'd buy at any electronics store, except that the software on it was not the kind you bought at any electronics store. He'd built it himself, kept it on him out of habit, the way some people kept a multi-tool or a pocket knife. He plugged it in. The screen shifted. 30 seconds. Nobody spoke. Then one of the technicians said very quietly, "What is that process map?" "Layered," Robert pointed without touching the screen. "You can see here. This chain is native. This is your authentication protocol. But this thread right here, this one doesn't belong. It's mimicking the signature of your security framework, but the timestamp is off by about 11 milliseconds. That's not a glitch. That's a placement interval. He heard Jennifer exhale slowly. He didn't look at her. Somebody put that there. She wasn't asking. Yes. When? Based on the accumulation pattern. Robert scrolled through the readout. I'd estimate between 48 and 60 hours ago. Another silence. A different kind than the ones before. Can you remove it? I can isolate it. Robert's hands moved across the keyboard with a fluency that came from muscle memory he'd thought was gone. I'd want to isolate it before I remove it, because if it's connected to anything external and you cut the thread without documenting it, you lose the trail. What trail? He looked at her then. Really looked at her. Met her eyes for the first time in the conversation as an equal rather than as a man explaining something to someone above him. Whoever put this here didn't just want access to your system. They wanted to watch it. This isn't a breach. This is reconnaissance. And if you want to know what they were looking for, you need to let me pull the thread before you cut it. Jennifer Anderson stared at him. The suited man beside her had gone very still. One of the technicians had his phone out, not to call anyone, to take a photo of the readout on the screen. Put that away. Jennifer said it without looking at him. The phone disappeared. She was still looking at Robert. You said your name is Robert? Yes. Robert what? Williams. And you work for facilities? Yes. How long? 7 months. She nodded slowly. Processing. He watched her do it. Watched the rapid, disciplined movement of thought behind her eyes. He recognized it distantly as the same thing he used to feel when a problem snapped into focus. All right, Robert Williams, isolate the thread. The technicians looked at each other. Miss Anderson. The suited man started. His voice was careful. I'm not sure that's David. Her voice was the scalpel again. Either trust the man who found what your team spent 12 hours missing, or stand somewhere else. David stood somewhere else. Robert pulled a chair up to the table, sat down, cracked his knuckles once. An old habit. The kind that comes back when you've been away from something and then suddenly aren't. And he started working. He didn't talk while he worked. He never had. Rebecca used to joke that you could tell Robert Williams had found a real problem because he stopped being a person and became something closer to weather. Present, purposeful, impossible to redirect. The process running in the background of Jennifer Anderson's laptop was elegant. He'd give whoever built it that much. It wasn't brute force. It wasn't careless. It was the kind of code that took patience and real knowledge of the system it was entering. The kind of knowledge you only got from the inside. He noted that, filed it away, said nothing. 14 minutes after he sat down, he had it isolated, documented, contained in a sandboxed partition that would keep it from communicating with anything external while he completed the analysis. He leaned back in the chair. Done. Jennifer, who had been standing exactly 3 feet to his right for the entire 14 minutes, leaned forward, looked at the screen. The presentation file. Should be accessible now. The authentication layer is clean. Try the login. One of the technicians reached over, typed in the credentials. The screen loaded. The presentation appeared, all 47 slides of it, intact, exactly as it had been saved. The technician let out a breath that sounded like a deflating tire. Okay, said the other technician. How? Said the third. Jennifer said nothing. She was reading the documentation Robert had generated during the isolation, a clean, precise record of the process, the timestamps, the mimicry pattern. Her eyes moved quickly. She was a fast reader. He'd noticed that about her before. On the 42nd floor in the early mornings, the way she consumed information, not word by word, but in chunks, pulling out the essential structure. She finished reading, looked up. You documented all of this in 14 minutes. It's not complicated documentation. The process was the complicated part. Where did you learn to do this? He paused. 1 beat. Then 2. A long time ago. She studied him. The way a person studies a lock they can't quite figure out. I want to talk to you. After the board meeting. I have a floor to finish, and then I'm on a 4 o'clock pickup. Pickup? My daughter. Something shifted in her expression, barely noticeable, like a door opening 1 inch before someone remembers to hold it shut. 4 o'clock. She repeated it. Yes. She nodded once. The way she nodded when she made a decision, not agreeing to something, recording it. The meeting ends at noon. My office, 12:15. She picked up the laptop, started walking, over her shoulder, without turning around. And Mr. Williams. He waited. Don't go anywhere. She rounded the corner. The technicians stood there in the hallway for a moment, looking at each other, then at Robert, then at the spot where Jennifer had been standing. The suited man, David, cleared his throat, looked at Robert with an expression that was difficult to read, something between resentment and reluctant respect. You want to tell me how a janitor knows more about our system architecture than the people who built it? Robert stood up, unplugged his drive, put it back on the cart. Lucky guess. He pushed the cart back down the hallway, the left wheel squeaking its slow, steady rhythm, while behind him, the 42nd floor slowly started breathing again. But inside his chest, something else was moving, something that had been still for a very long time, because the code he'd found on that laptop. The patient, precise, architectural code. He'd seen its fingerprints before. Not style, not technique, signature. And the last time he'd seen that signature, it had been in a system he himself had designed, which meant that whoever was inside Anderson Technologies right now wasn't a stranger. They knew Robert Williams's work, and that meant, on some level, they knew him. The board meeting started at 9:02. Robert knew this because he was cleaning the glass partition outside the conference room when he heard the double doors pull shut, and he checked the clock on the wall out of habit. The same habit that had once made him the most reliably punctual consultant in a city full of people who treated other people's time like a renewable resource. He didn't look through the glass. He didn't need to. He kept the squeegee moving in long, even strokes, and he listened to the particular quality of the silence that came from a room full of people who had flown in from across the country and were now waiting to be convinced that everything was fine. He wondered if Jennifer was going to tell them what she'd found on her laptop. He doubted it. He moved his cart to the next section of glass and kept working. The thing about the 42nd floor, the thing that most people who worked there never noticed, because most people who worked there were never required to be invisible. The walls on that floor were thinner than the architects had probably intended. The ventilation system carried sound in directions that made no logical sense. And the people who walked those hallways were so accustomed to being surrounded only by other important people that they had never developed the reflex of lowering their voices when a service worker was nearby. Robert had learned more about Anderson Technologies in 7 months of cleaning than most analysts learned in a year of research. He hadn't done anything with that knowledge. It wasn't his to use. But it lived in him the way all knowledge lived in him. Organized, indexed, patient. He was restocking the supply cabinet near the east stairwell when David found him. David Martinez. That was his full name. Robert had learned it from the nameplate on his office door. His title was Chief Technology Officer, which meant that the morning's events had been professionally catastrophic for him in a way that was only going to become clearer as the day went on. He walked up to Robert with his hands in his pockets and the careful, controlled expression of a man who was angry and had decided to be strategic about it instead. "I need to ask you something." Robert didn't turn around. "Sure." "When you looked at that diagnostic readout, the one my team was running, how long did you actually see it for?" Robert turned around. "A few seconds? A few seconds. Maybe 3. David studied him. Not the way Jennifer had studied him. This was different. This was the look of a man trying to decide whether to be impressed or threatened. And from 3 seconds of a diagnostic readout, you identified an embedded process, characterized its behavior, estimated its installation window, and determined that it was reconnaissance rather than an active breach. Yes, from 3 seconds. The pattern was distinctive. Once you know what that kind of embedding looks like, it's not hard to recognize. once you know what it looks like." David repeated it the way a prosecutor repeats something back to a witness, not to clarify, to mark it. "And where exactly did you learn what it looks like?" Robert held his gaze. "I told you. Lucky guess." "Right." David's jaw tightened. "Here's my problem with that, Robert. I've been in cybersecurity for 19 years. I have a team of 8 engineers, all of them certified, most of them with graduate degrees. None of them caught what you caught. So either we're all very bad at our jobs, or you're very good at yours. And I'd like to know which one it is." "Could be both." David didn't appreciate that. "I'm going to find out who you are. I'm going to look you up. I'm going to call your references. And I'm going to find out why a man with whatever you're carrying around in your head is pushing a cart on the 42nd floor." Robert nodded slowly. "That's your right." "Yeah." David's voice was quiet, but it had an edge to it that was meant to land. "It is." He started to walk away, then stopped, turned back. "The process you isolated. You said whoever built it knew the system architecture." "Yes." "Our system architecture isn't public. It's not documented outside of internal files. The only people who have access to the structural framework are people who work here or people who worked here." Robert said nothing. "So you understand why I'm having a very strange morning?" "I understand." David looked at him for one more moment. Then he walked away. The sound of his footsteps on the marble faded down the hallway. Robert turned back to the supply cabinet, stood there for a moment with his hand resting on the shelf, not moving, just breathing. Because David wasn't wrong. The architecture knowledge wasn't the part that was keeping Robert's mind occupied, though. He'd already worked that angle. There were ways in from the outside if you were patient and skilled enough. Ways to map a system structure without ever having touched it directly. That was possible. Difficult, but possible. What wasn't possible, what he couldn't explain away, was the signature. Code had a fingerprint. The way handwriting had a fingerprint. The structure of logic chains. The specific way a programmer solved the micro-decisions. Whether to use recursion or iteration. How to handle the edge cases. Where to place the redundancies. All of it accumulated into something that was, if you had enough experience reading it, as identifiable as a face. And the fingerprint on that embedded process was one Robert had spent years living inside of. It was his own, not his current self's work. He hadn't written a line of professional code in nearly a decade. But the methodology, the specific architecture of the logic, it was built on a framework he had designed, a proprietary framework that he had created for a contract client in 2011. A framework that had never been published, never been open-sourced, never been shared beyond the walls of that one specific project. A project that had been acquired, along with everything in it, by a company that no longer existed under its original name. He needed to make a call. He looked at his watch. The board meeting would run until at least 11:30. He had time. He wheeled his cart to the service corridor, tucked it against the wall, pulled out his phone. The number he needed wasn't saved. He'd deleted it 18 months ago when he decided that the previous chapter of his life was finished, and he was going to stop leaving doors open to it. He dialed it from memory, which was the thing about a memory like his. You could delete the contact, but you couldn't delete the number. Some things just lived in you permanently, whether you wanted them to or not. It rang 4 times. Then a voice said cautiously, "Yeah?" "It's Robert." A pause. "Robert Williams?" "Yeah." Another pause, longer. "It's been a while." "I know. I need to ask you something about the Apex project." The name landed in the silence like a stone in still water. "That's not a conversation for a phone." "I know, but I need a yes or no. The framework, our framework, is it still locked up? Has it been licensed to anyone, sold, transferred, anything?" The voice on the other end was quiet for so long that Robert thought the call might have dropped. "Not that I know of." It finally said. After the acquisition, it was supposed to be archived, off limits. Why? Because I just found it running inside someone else's system, and it wasn't invited. Another long silence. Who? The voice asked. Anderson Technologies. Jennifer Anderson's company. You know her? I know of her. The voice shifted, a subtle change in texture, something careful entering it. Robert, that framework wasn't just archived. After the acquisition, there was a whole chain of custody review. The only people who had access to the original source code were you, me, and 3 others. 5 people total. I know. Which means, one of us. Robert said it. I know. The service corridor was very still. Somewhere above him, on the other side of the wall, the board meeting was happening. Jennifer standing at the front of the room with the presentation he'd rescued, delivering it with the composure she'd maintained through everything that morning. And underneath all of it, quiet and patient and waiting, the thing he'd isolated was sitting in its sandboxed partition. I need the access logs. Robert kept his voice low. Whatever you can pull from the acquisition records. Who touched the framework after the handover? Any usage events? Any export records? Anything. I don't know if I can still get those. Can you try? The voice hesitated. Robert, you're a janitor now. This isn't your problem anymore. Someone used our work to break into a company's system. Used it specifically, deliberately. That makes it mine. A long breath on the other end of the line. I'll see what I can do. Give me a few hours. I've got until 4. Why 4? Emily's pickup. Right. The voice softened just slightly. How is she? She's good. She's great. She made the honor roll. That's good, man. That's really good. Yeah. I'll call you when I have something. Robert hung up, put the phone back in his pocket, looked down the service corridor at nothing in particular. Then he went back to his cart and finished cleaning the 42nd floor. The board meeting ended at 11:47. Robert knew this because he was in the copy room when he heard the double doors open, and he heard the particular cadence of conversation that flows out of a successful meeting. Not jubilant, but eased. The way people talk when they've been tense for hours and the tension has been properly resolved. He heard Jennifer's voice briefly, 2 words to someone, sharp and directive, then the sound of her heels on the floor, moving away. He checked his watch. 12:08. He had 7 minutes. He found a bathroom, washed his hands, looked at himself in the mirror for a moment. He was 53 years old. He looked it. Not badly, not broken down, but undeniably it. The gray at his temples had been coming in since he was 45. The lines around his eyes were the kind that came from squinting at screens in the dark, and from years of not sleeping enough, and from the specific ongoing work of raising a child alone. He hadn't worn a suit in 4 years. He was wearing his facility's uniform, dark gray, his name stitched on the pocket. He thought about changing. He didn't have anything to change into. He went to Jennifer Anderson's office at 12:15 exactly. Her assistant, Amanda, looked up when he appeared in the doorway. Something moved across her face. Not unkindness. More like the mild confusion of a person whose world has just quietly rearranged itself. Mr. Williams? She's expecting you. He'd never been called Mr. Williams on the 42nd floor. He knocked on the open office door. Jennifer was at her desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled, a pen in her hand that she set down when she looked up. The presentation was on the screen behind her. Closed now. Done. Purpose served. The window behind her desk looked out over a city that didn't care about any of this. Sit down. He sat. The chair across from her desk was the kind of chair designed to make you feel like you belonged in the room. He noticed that. He also noticed that she was looking at him differently than she had in the hallway. Less reactive, more considered. She'd had 3 hours to think about him, and she'd used them. How was the meeting? She looked at him for a beat. Fine. The presentation was fine. They approved the funding for the next development cycle. She said it efficiently. the way you close a completed task. I want to talk about the other thing. Okay. The process you isolated. You said you'd want to pull the thread before cutting it. Yes. Have you started that? Not yet. I wanted your authorization before I went further. She leaned back in her chair. You wanted my authorization. It's your system. I'm not going to go deeper into it without your knowledge. Something moved in her expression. That door opening an inch thing again. Most people who know what they're doing don't ask permission. They just do it. Most people who know what they're doing get themselves into trouble that way. She looked at him steadily. Tell me who you are. The real version. He was quiet for a moment. Then, what did David tell you? David told me he ran your background check and came up with a work history that starts 7 years ago at a building management company in Cincinnati, and before that is essentially a wall. She tilted her head. Which means either you're very careful or someone was very careful on your behalf. The first one. Why? He looked at his hands for a moment, then at her. I had a consulting firm. Network security architecture. I built systems for enterprise clients, mostly financial sector, some government adjacent. We were small, but we were good. And by 2009, we had a reputation. He said all of this evenly, not performing anything, just stating it. My wife got sick in 2016. She died in 2017. When she died, I had a 2-year-old daughter and a grief that I didn't know what to do with. And I decided that the most important thing I could do was be present for my kid. He paused. So I sold the firm, stepped back from the industry, and spent the next several years being a father. Jennifer said nothing. She was listening with the full contact attention she gave to things that mattered. The work history wall is because when I stepped back, I stepped all the way back. New city, fresh start. The consulting identity was tied to a professional name I'd built up. I didn't want to be found. Not for work reasons, just... He stopped, picked the right words. I needed a clean line between who I was and who I was becoming. And who you were becoming was a janitor. Who I was becoming was Emily's dad. The job was just the job that let me do that on the hours I needed. A long silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that happens when two people are both thinking clearly and don't need to fill the air. The framework on your system. Robert shifted forward slightly. The architecture of the embedded process. I recognized it this morning because I built it. Jennifer went very still. Not the process itself. The framework it's built on. It's a proprietary methodology that I developed for a specific client project in 2011. It was never published. It was supposed to be archived after the acquisition. Which acquisition? The client company was acquired by a larger firm in 2013. Everything we built for them was supposed to be locked, off limits, accessible to no one outside of a controlled custody chain. Supposed to be? Yes. She pulled a legal pad toward her, wrote something. You said whoever built it knew the architecture. From the inside, which means someone with access to that custody chain or someone who got access to it without authorization. He let that land. I have someone looking into the access logs right now, whatever they can pull from the acquisition records, who touched the framework after the handover, any usage events, any export records, anything. Someone. Her voice was careful. Who? A former colleague. Someone I trust. She looked at him carefully. You started investigating this on your own. I started making a phone call. I haven't touched your system again. But you want to? He held her gaze. There's more in there. The process is isolated, but it's not inert. It's still running. It's just contained. Whatever it was collecting before I sandboxed it, that data is still somewhere, and whoever put it there is going to notice eventually that it stopped reporting back. How long until they notice? Depends on how often they were checking. Could be hours, could be less. Jennifer set the pen down, looked at the ceiling briefly, a gesture he was starting to recognize as her version of a thinking pause. Then she looked back at him. My board just approved $140 million for the next development cycle. We start implementation in 30 days. The architecture for that implementation, the structural plans, the security framework, the partner network, all of it lives on systems connected to this one. She said it flatly, without drama, just information. If someone is mapping our infrastructure, they're not doing it for fun. No. They're doing it because in 30 days, when you start moving money and data and access credentials through that network, they want to be inside it already, watching, waiting. That's what the evidence suggests. She stood up, walked to the window, stood there for a moment with her back to him, not dismissing him, just processing. He watched the set of her shoulders, the particular stillness of someone running through very large numbers very fast. My IT team, David's team, can they handle this? Robert considered the question seriously. They're good engineers, but they spent 12 hours on the surface of this problem and didn't see it. The person who built this process knew what they were doing. It's going to take someone who thinks the same way they do. Someone like you. Yes. She turned around. And in exchange for that, what do you want? He shook his head slightly. I'm not asking for anything. That's not how this works. Her voice was not unkind, but it was firm. In my experience, when someone says they don't want anything, it means they haven't decided what they want yet. So I'm asking you directly, and I'd like a direct answer. He looked at her. He thought about Emily, about the apartment with the thin walls and the bus that ran once an hour before 6 in the morning, about the honor roll certificate on the refrigerator that he'd taped up with 3 pieces of masking tape because he'd run out of magnets, about the old laptop in his cart downstairs in the service corridor because he hadn't been able to bring himself to completely walk away from the thing he was best at. I want to finish the job, that's all. I want to find out what's in your system, who put it there, and why. And then I want to make sure they can't do it again. She looked at him for a long time. Why? And it was a genuine question, not a challenge, not a test, real curiosity. He thought about the code signature, about the framework that lived in his hands before it lived anywhere else, about the fact that someone had taken something he built and used it to do something he never intended. Because it's mine, what they used to get in here, the methodology, the architecture, I built that, and nobody asked me if it was okay to use it this way. Jennifer nodded once, the recording a decision nod. You'll work directly with me, not David, not his team, not until I decide otherwise. You'll have access to whatever systems you need. You'll check in with me every 2 hours, and you'll tell me everything you find, in plain language, as you find it. She paused. And you'll be here tomorrow morning. I'm on facility schedule. I'll talk to Donald. Donald's not going to love that. Donald doesn't have to love it. He just has to agree to it. She picked up the pen again. And Mr. Williams, you said 4 o'clock. Your daughter? Yes. What time does her school start? He paused. 8:15. Then be here at 8:30 and go get your daughter at 4. Whatever you're doing in between, do it on my system, with my resources, and do it fast. She looked directly at him. Because if they notice the process has gone quiet, the clock starts. I know. Do you need anything right now? Equipment? Access? Credentials? He thought for a moment. I need access to your server architecture maps, full topology, and I need the maintenance logs for the last 90 days. Not IT maintenance, physical maintenance. Who's been in the server rooms? Access card records. She wrote it down. You'll have them in an hour. He stood up. She was already back on the phone before he reached the door. Amanda, I need the physical access logs for the data center, last 90 days, and get Donald from facilities on the phone. Robert walked back down the hallway toward the service corridor. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from the number he'd called that morning. No name attached. Found something in the logs. You're not going to like it. Call me. He didn't call right away. He stood for a moment by the window at the end of the corridor, looking out at the city the way Jennifer had. And he thought about how the thing you walk away from never fully lets you go. He thought about how he'd told himself for 7 years that this part of his life was over. He thought about Emily at school right now, drawing something in the margins of her notebook the way she always did, not knowing that her father was standing on the 42nd floor of a building he cleaned for a living, holding a thread that led somewhere he couldn't fully see yet. He pulled out his phone and made the call. "Tell me." The voice on the other end took a breath. The kind of breath that precedes something you've been sitting with for too long and have finally decided to say out loud. "I pulled the access logs from the acquisition archive, the Apex handover records. There were 5 people on the authorized custody chain after the deal closed. You, me, Patterson, Sellers, and Webb." "Right. You walked away clean. We know that. I've been out of the industry for 3 years. You know that. Patterson died in 2019. Which leaves 2 names. Sellers or Webb. I thought so too. So I went further back, pulled the original framework export records, looking for any unauthorized copies, any instances where the source code was accessed outside of normal workflow, and I found something." Another pause. "Someone accessed the core framework files 11 months after the acquisition closed. Single access event. 3:14 in the morning on a Tuesday. That's not a scheduled access." "No. And it wasn't logged under any of the 5 authorized names." Robert was quiet for a moment. "Then who?" "That's the part you're not going to like. The access credential used was yours." The corridor went very still around him. "That's not possible." "I know. I was already out by then. I hadn't touched anything in that system since the handover review. I physically handed over my credentials at the closing meeting. I watched them revoke the access in real time." "I know that too. Which means someone either cloned your credential before the handover, or someone had access to the revocation records and found a window before the system fully processed the removal." A pause. "Either way, whoever accessed those files wanted it to look like you." Robert put his back against the wall. His mind was moving very fast and very quietly, the way it did when a problem opened up into something larger than it had appeared from the outside. "Is the access log auditable? If someone looked at it now, would they see my name on it?" "Yes." "So if this gets investigated officially, legally, the first thing anyone would find is that Robert Williams accessed the Apex framework 11 months post-acquisition. And Robert Williams is currently working inside Anderson Technologies." He let that settle, felt the full weight of it. "They set me up." "Looks like it. And Robert, they didn't set you up after the fact. This was 11 months post-acquisition. That's years ago. Whoever did this has been building this frame around you for a long time. Which means they knew even then that eventually I'd end up somewhere near this system. Or they needed a fall guy, and I was the most convenient option. Someone who'd walked away from the industry, gone quiet, no institutional protection. Either way, you need to be careful. If this thing blows open and you're standing inside Anderson Technologies with your hands on their network..." "I know." "Does the CEO know who you are, really?" "No. I told her some of it this morning. You need to tell her the rest of it, all of it, before David runs your name through anything official and it comes back wrong." Robert pushed off the wall, started moving back toward the service corridor. "How solid is your source on the access logs?" "I pulled them directly from the acquisition firm's retained records. They're the originals, not copies, not summaries, but I can't hold them indefinitely, and I can't share them officially without creating exposure for myself. I need them in digital form. Anything you can send securely." "I can do that. Give me an hour." A hesitation. "Robert, this is not a small thing you're walking into." "I know. Emily needs her father present, not wrapped up in a federal investigation." "I know that too." Robert's voice was even, but his chest was tight with something he wasn't going to name right now because naming it would slow him down, and he couldn't afford slow. "Send me the logs." He hung up, stood in the service corridor for 3 full seconds. Then he went to find David. David wasn't hard to find. He was in the IT bullpen on the 42nd floor, standing over a workstation with two of his engineers, reviewing something on the monitor with the posture of a man who had been professionally embarrassed and was working very hard to unembarrass himself before anyone important noticed. He saw Robert coming and straightened up. "I need 5 minutes." David looked at his engineers. They suddenly found their monitors very interesting. "My office." David's office was a glass box on the interior wall of the bullpen, visible from all sides, which Robert suspected was either a design oversight or a deliberate symbol of the kind of transparent leadership style that looked good in company literature and was actually just uncomfortable in practice. David closed the door behind them, stood with his arms crossed. "You went to see Jennifer. She asked me to. And she asked you to look deeper into the system." "Into the company system?" "Yes." David's jaw tightened. "Into my system." "I understand that's uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable." David repeated it, and the word came out clipped and precise. "You want to know what's uncomfortable? Uncomfortable is finding out that the man who embarrassed my team this morning has a work history that effectively starts in 2016 and a background that nobody can verify." He took a step forward. "I ran your name through our standard security clearance check. You know what came back? Probably not much. Nothing meaningful, so I went further. I have resources that go further, and I found something interesting." He paused for effect. "There's a name that comes up in archived records from a 2013 corporate acquisition, a cybersecurity consultant named Robert Williams who was part of the development team for something called the Apex project." Robert held his expression steady. "I'm still pulling that thread. But here's what I know right now. The Apex framework was acquired as proprietary intellectual property. It was supposed to be secured and archived, and one of its original developers is currently standing in my office." He let that sit. "You want to explain to me why I shouldn't be treating you as a person of interest?" "Because I found the breach. I didn't cause it. People who set fires sometimes report them too. It keeps them close to the investigation." "That's true. It also means sometimes the person who finds the fire is the person who knows the most about how fires work." He kept his voice level. "David, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to set aside whatever you're feeling about this morning and actually hear it." David said nothing, but he was listening. "The framework on your system, the architecture used to build that embedded process, it was built from Apex code. I recognized it this morning because I wrote the original methodology, but I didn't put it there. Someone accessed the Apex source files years ago using credentials that had my name on them, credentials that should have been revoked. They've been building a frame around me, and if this thing becomes an official investigation, the first name in the access logs is mine." He paused. "Which means I need to pull the full thread before anyone pulls it for me. And I need to do it fast, because whoever put that process in your system is going to notice that it's gone quiet. And when they do, they're going to move." David stared at him for a long moment. His arms were still crossed, but the angle of them had shifted, no longer defensive, more like a man physically holding his own reaction in place while he decided what to do with it. "You're telling me you're being set up?" "Yes. And you're asking me to help you instead of report you. I'm asking you to give me enough time to show you the access logs. I have someone sending them now, the original records from the acquisition firm. My name is in there, but when you look at the timestamp and the metadata, you'll see it doesn't hold up. The access happened at 3:14 in the morning on a Tuesday, more than a year after I'd been out of the industry. No VPN record, no device signature that matches anything in my history." David uncrossed his arms slowly. "How long until you get those logs?" "An hour." "And you're already working the system. Jennifer gave you access." "Not yet. I wanted to have this conversation first." David looked at him with an expression that was harder to read now. Not warm, not hostile, but recalibrated somehow, like a compass that had been shaken and was finding north again. Why? You have Jennifer's authorization. You don't need mine. Because when this is done, you're going to be responsible for this company's security infrastructure going forward. And you can't do that job right if you think I'm the enemy. He held David's gaze. I'm not the enemy. The silence in the glass box lasted a long time. Show me the logs when they arrive, and until then, you stay in the system Jennifer authorized, and you don't go further without clearing it with me first. Whatever she told you, she and I will sort out the jurisdictional question later. Right now, we have the same problem. Agreed. All right. David's voice was still tight, but the edge had dulled. Get to work. Robert went to work. Jennifer had arranged a workstation for him in a small conference room off the main hallway. Not the IT bullpen, not a visible public space, just a room with a table, a monitor, and a door that closed. Amanda had left an access credential card on the table and a handwritten note that said, in neat blocky letters, "Server topology files loaded, maintenance logs attached, call if you need anything." And below that, a 4-digit extension. He sat down, plugged in his drive, let himself think for a moment before he started. The process he'd isolated that morning was sitting in its sandbox, still running its internal cycles, still generating the pattern of activity that made it look, to its own internal logic, like it was connected and functioning normally. It didn't know it was cut off. That was the elegance of a good sandbox. It didn't silence the process. It created a convincing enough illusion that the process kept behaving naturally, kept generating data, kept revealing itself. He opened the process documentation he'd compiled that morning and read through it again from the beginning. He was looking for the thing he'd been too focused to look for in the urgency of the initial isolation. Not what the process was doing, but how it had been delivered. The delivery method was the fingerprint that the builder could never fully erase. It took him 40 minutes to find it. The process had been introduced through a physical access point, not a remote intrusion, not a phishing delivery, not a supply chain attack. Someone had physically connected a device to a node in the server infrastructure, on site, in the building, which meant the physical maintenance logs weren't just relevant, they were the map. He pulled them up. 90 days of access records for the data center on the 38th floor, 47 entries. He started reading. Most of them were routine, scheduled maintenance windows, cooling system checks, hardware replacement. They had timestamps, badge IDs, work order numbers. He cross-referenced against the internal employee directory, against the facility's contractor list. 38 entries were clean, 7 were interesting. 1 was a problem. The problem entry was from 63 days ago. A facilities contractor logged into the data center at 7:42 in the evening, outside of a scheduled maintenance window, with a work order that had been retroactively entered into the system 20 minutes after the badge swipe. The badge ID belonged to a third-party HVAC contractor. The name on the contractor record was Brian Walker. He looked up the contractor company. It existed. A small HVAC maintenance firm out of New Jersey. He looked up Brian Walker. Also existed. A real employee, real work history, real contractor relationship with Anderson Technologies going back 4 years. He called the contractor company's main number. A receptionist answered. "Hi, this is David Monroe from Anderson Technologies Facilities Management. I'm doing a routine reconciliation of our contractor log, and I have a work entry for one of your techs. Brian Walker, evening of..." He gave the date. "Can you verify that visit was scheduled?" A pause. Typing sounds. "Mr. Walker was out on medical leave that week. He had knee surgery. He definitely wasn't on any job sites." "So this wasn't one of your team members?" "No, sir. If there's a log entry with his badge, I'd be concerned about that. His credentials should have been on hold." "Thank you, I'll look into it." He hung up, sat back. Someone had used a real contractor's badge, either stolen, cloned, or accessed through the contractor company's credential system, to walk into the data center 63 days ago and physically introduce the embedded process into the server infrastructure. They'd submitted a retroactive work order to cover the visit. They'd chosen an evening when the floor was minimally staffed. And they'd used an HVAC tech's credentials because HVAC contractors had physical access to server rooms for environmental maintenance, and nobody thought twice about them. This was not improvised. This was months of preparation. He was writing up the finding when his phone buzzed. The logs from his contact had arrived. A compressed file, encrypted, with a separate message containing the decryption key. He opened them on his personal drive, not the workstation, and read through them carefully. The access event was exactly as described. 3:14 in the morning, 11 months post-acquisition. His credential, ID, now revoked. Used to access the Apex Framework source files. Duration 22 minutes. Files accessed. Core logic architecture, authentication methodology, the proprietary embedding framework he'd spent 3 months building. The metadata was wrong in exactly the way he'd known it would be. The device signature, the digital fingerprint of the machine used to access the files, didn't match any hardware he'd ever owned, used, or been associated with. The geographic IP origin placed the access in a city he'd never lived in or visited during that period. And the behavioral pattern of the file access, the sequence in which the files were opened, the navigation pattern through the directory, was nothing like his own. Someone had used his credential, but they hadn't been able to fake being him. He compiled everything into a single document. The process documentation, the contractor log anomaly, the access logs with his analysis of the metadata inconsistencies. And he was about to send it to Jennifer when the conference room door opened. It wasn't David. It wasn't Amanda. It was a man he'd never seen on the 42nd floor before. Mid-50s, well-dressed in the understated way of someone who'd been told at some point that wealth didn't need to announce itself. Silver hair, sharp eyes, the kind of posture that came from decades of being the most important person in rooms. He was carrying a cup of coffee and wearing an expression of relaxed authority, like a man who had never once had to ask permission to go anywhere. "You must be the janitor." Robert looked at him. "And you are?" "George Harris." He didn't offer a hand, just sat down in the chair across from Robert with the ease of someone who sat wherever they wanted. "I'm on the board. I flew in this morning for the meeting." He glanced at the screen. "Jennifer tells me you had an interesting morning. She told you about me. She mentioned there was a situation that had been handled." He tilted his head. "I like to understand situations." He nodded toward the screen. "Find anything useful?" Robert closed the documentation on the workstation. Not quickly, just calmly. The way you close something when you've decided you're done sharing it. "I'm still working through it." Harris smiled. It was a comfortable smile. The smile of a man who was used to people being slightly nervous around him and found it neither threatening nor bothersome. "I've been on the Anderson board for 6 years. Watched this company grow from a mid-sized security firm into what it is now. Jennifer's exceptional at what she does. But she has a tendency, and I say this with real respect, to trust the person in front of her when they've demonstrated competence without fully accounting for the question of motive." Robert said nothing. "So I like to ask about motive," Harris continued. His voice was conversational. "What brings a man with your apparent capabilities to a janitorial position in a building like this?" "I needed a job with specific hours." "For your daughter?" "Yes." "That's admirable." Harris said it without irony, but also without warmth. The way you call something admirable when you respect the fact without being moved by it. "What's her name?" Robert looked at him steadily. "That's not information I share at work." Something shifted in Harris's expression, almost imperceptible. The comfortable smile stayed, but something behind the eyes recalibrated, the way it had with Jennifer earlier. Except this was different. Jennifer's recalibration had been respect. This was something closer to reassessment. "Fair enough." Harris stood, picked up his coffee. "I won't keep you from your work, Mr. Williams. I just wanted to put a face to the story." He moved toward the door, then paused, with one hand on the frame. the way people paused in doorways when they had one more thing to say that they wanted to seem casual. One thing, since you're looking at our systems. We had a third-party security audit about 8 months ago, external firm. The lead auditor had access to our full server topology for about 3 weeks. I always thought that was a longer access window than necessary, but Jennifer overruled my concern. He paused just a beat. Might be worth looking at. He left. Robert sat with that for a moment. Then he opened a new window and typed in a search. Anderson Technologies, third-party security audit, external firm, 8 months ago. The firm's name came back in a press release from a trade publication. A routine announcement of the engagement. The kind of corporate transparency item that lived on a company's PR page and nobody ever read. The firm was called Sentinel Security Group, based in Chicago, founded in 2018. He searched for the founders. The first name that came up was Stephen Clark, the same Stephen Clark who had been on the authorized custody chain for the Apex Framework acquisition. Robert's hands went still on the keyboard. Clark had run the security audit. Clark had been inside Anderson Technologies' full server topology for 3 weeks, 8 months ago. Clark had had access to the physical data center, and Clark was one of only 4 living people with knowledge of the Apex framework. The framework whose signature was now sitting on Jennifer Anderson's network, wearing Robert's stolen credentials like a mask. He picked up his phone and called Jennifer directly. She picked up on the second ring. "What did you find?" "Enough. I need you to do something right now before you do anything else. Your third-party security audit 8 months ago. The firm that ran it. I need to know if Stephen Clark had unsupervised access to your data center during that engagement." A pause. "How do you know that name?" "Because I worked with him 12 years ago and his company's fingerprints are on everything I've been looking at this morning." He stood up from the workstation. "Jennifer, George Harris just came to see me." The silence on the other end was brief but absolute. "He's not supposed to know you're here." "I know. Who told him?" "That's what I'd like to know. And I'd like to know it before he has another conversation with someone I haven't talked to yet." He could hear her breathing, steady and controlled, the way she controlled everything. "Then I'll pull the audit access records. Come to my office in 20 minutes. "I'll be there." He hung up, looked at the closed door of the conference room, thought about what Harris had said. Jennifer has a tendency to trust the person in front of her when they've demonstrated competence without fully accounting for the question of motive. It was the kind of thing you said to plant a seed, the kind of thing you said when you wanted someone to look at the person helping them and start wondering instead of trusting. He thought about the frame that had been built around his name in the access logs. He thought about Clark's audit 8 months ago. He thought about the fact that this intrusion, patient, architectural, years in the making, had required someone who understood not just how to build the process, but how to predict where Robert Williams would eventually land. How to make sure that when the process was discovered, his name would be the one attached to its history. That level of knowledge wasn't research. That was personal. Jennifer was already on her feet when Robert walked through the door. She had the audit access records on her screen, a spreadsheet pulled from the facilities management system, time-stamped entries going back 8 months, and she was reading them with the focused intensity of someone who had already found something and was now deciding what to do about it. She looked up when he entered. Whatever she saw in his face confirmed whatever she was already thinking. "Sit down." He sat. She turned the screen toward him. "Stephen Clark, lead auditor, Sentinel Security Group. 3-week engagement beginning 8 months and 4 days ago. Full topology access. Level 4 data center clearance." She tapped the screen. "And 11 individual after-hours entries to the physical data center between 7 p.m. and midnight. Unsupervised? Our protocol for third-party auditors requires an Anderson escort during physical data center access." Her voice was controlled, too controlled, the kind of control that takes effort. Every one of those 11 entries has an escort badge logged alongside Clark's. The escort ID belongs to a senior facilities coordinator named Kenneth Moore. She paused. Kenneth Moore resigned 4 months ago. He's currently uncontactable at his last known address. Robert absorbed that. Clark didn't just have access. He had a partner on the inside. It looks that way. She pulled the screen back. Tell me how you know Clark. We worked together on the Apex project. He was one of 5 people on the authorized custody chain when the framework was acquired. He had legitimate access to the source code until the handover review closed. He looked at her directly. And as of this morning, I know that someone used my old credential to access the Apex source files about a year after the acquisition. The metadata doesn't hold up. Wrong device signature, wrong IP origin, but on paper my name is in the logs. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. He set you up. He set up a contingency. If this breach was ever discovered and traced back to the Apex framework, the first name in the access records is mine. I'm already inside your building. I've already had my hands on your system. He let her draw the geometry of it herself because Jennifer Anderson didn't need things explained to her twice. She drew it. He watched her do it, watched her eyes move through the logic. The frame only works if you're the one who found it. She was working through it out loud now. If someone else had found the breach, my IT team, an external investigator, your presence in the building and your name in the Apex logs would have been a very compelling story. Yes, but I found it, and I came directly to you, which wasn't in the plan. I don't think Clark expected a janitor to identify his framework in a 3-second glance at a diagnostic readout. Something almost moved across Jennifer's face. Not quite a smile, but the shadow of one. It disappeared quickly. George Harris came to see you. He came to plant doubt. He told me you trust people who demonstrate competence without accounting for motive. He mentioned the audit, Clark's access window, said it might be worth looking at. He watched her. That last part was either genuinely trying to help or testing whether I'd chase that thread and expose myself in the process. Which do you think? I don't know yet, but the fact that he knew I was in that conference room and knew enough about this morning to characterize what I was doing, that came from somewhere. Someone told him. And the only people who knew you were working that room were me, David, and Amanda. Jennifer's expression didn't change. I didn't tell him. I know. And Amanda has been with me for 4 years. She's not a variable. That leaves David. The silence that followed was careful. Jennifer walked to the window, stood there with her arms crossed. Not the defensive cross, the thinking cross, the one where she was holding herself together while she ran the numbers. David didn't know about Clark. He didn't know about the Apex connection. I didn't tell him the details of our conversation. He didn't need to know about Clark to tell Harris there was a consultant in the conference room. All it took was one sentence. Jennifer has someone looking at the system. That's enough for Harris to go investigating on his own. Why would David tell Harris anything? I don't know. Maybe he didn't mean to. Maybe it was a casual comment in the elevator after the board meeting. Maybe it was something else. He paused. Or maybe David's been uncomfortable since this morning for reasons that go beyond professional embarrassment, and he wanted someone with more authority than himself to take a look. Jennifer turned around. You don't trust him. I don't distrust him. I just don't have enough information yet. He leaned forward. Jennifer, here's what I know with confidence right now. Clark used the audit to physically place the embedded process in your infrastructure. 11 after-hours visits, an inside escort. Enough access to do it carefully and cleanly. He built it on Apex architecture so that if it was ever traced, it would trace back to me. He left my credential in the access logs as insurance, and the process has been running for 63 days, quietly mapping your system, waiting. Waiting for what? The development cycle. The $140 million you announced this morning. Your board approved implementation in 30 days. Clark, or whoever Clark is working for, wants to be sitting inside your network when that money starts moving, when the access credentials for the partner network get generated, when the financial architecture goes live. Jennifer looked at him for a long moment. You said whoever Clark is working for. Clark is good. But this operation is bigger than Clark. The level of preparation, the patience, the resources to run a legitimate security consulting firm as a cover for an inside job. This is funded. This is directed. He met her eyes. Clark is the instrument. There's a hand holding him. She was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Harris, I don't have evidence of that yet, but you think it. I think George Harris has been on your board for 6 years. I think he was the one who expressed concern about the audit access window, which either means he was genuinely worried or he's careful enough to put his objection on record before the thing he enabled gets discovered. He paused. I think he came to see me specifically to test how much I knew and to put doubt in my mind about you. And I think a man who sits on the board of a company doesn't usually walk down to a conference room to personally interview a janitor unless the janitor is relevant to something he cares about very much. Jennifer sat down, not the controlled, deliberate motion of a CEO taking command of a room, just a person sitting down because the weight of what she was carrying had become something she needed to rest with for a moment. She put both hands flat on the desk, looked at them. 6 years. He's been on this board for 6 years. I know. He was on the selection committee when we hired our last 2 department heads. He had input into the audit firm selection. She said it quietly, not to Robert, but to herself, running the inventory of access. He was in the room for every major strategic discussion we've had. I know. She looked up. Can you prove it? Not yet. But the process is still running. It's still generating data in the sandbox. If I let it run long enough, it will eventually try to phone home, to push whatever it's collected to an external receiver. That receiver is an IP address, and that IP address is traceable. He kept his voice steady. I need a few more hours with the system, and I need it to look, from the outside, like nothing has changed, meaning the process can't appear to have been isolated. If Clark or whoever is monitoring it sees that it's been contained, they'll cut the connection, and you lose the thread. I need the sandbox to stay invisible. The process has to keep behaving like it's still running normally inside your system. Can you do that? I already did it this morning. The question is how long the illusion holds. He checked his watch. 3:17. I need to make a call, and then I need to be somewhere at 4. Your daughter. Yes. He stood. I'll be back by 5:30. If anything moves on the system before I'm back, if the process changes behavior in any way, call me immediately. I'll have David monitor it. He hesitated. I know. Her voice was firm. But I can't freeze him out entirely. If he's connected to this, pulling him off will signal something's wrong. If he's not connected to this, I need him functional. She looked at Robert with a directness that was the thing he'd come to recognize as simply her. Not aggressive, just utterly without pretense. I've been running this company for 11 years. I know how to keep information compartmentalized. He nodded. Tell him the process is stable and contained. Don't tell him you're waiting for it to move. Understood. She picked up a pen, set it back down. Robert. He stopped. I owe you an apology. This morning, the way I spoke to you. He was quiet for a moment. You were under pressure. That's not an excuse. She said it plainly, without overperforming the contrition. I looked at you, and I saw your job title, and I reacted to that instead of to you. That was wrong. He looked at her for a moment, then, thank you. She nodded. Go get your daughter. He went. The bus that ran through his neighborhood took 41 minutes to reach the school. He'd made this calculation so many times that it was automatic now, the way a pilot knows the numbers for a route they've flown 1,000 times. He was at the bus stop at 3:22. He boarded at 3:26. He'd be at the school at 4:07, which was 7 minutes late, which meant Emily would be standing outside the front entrance with her backpack on both shoulders and her expression of theatrical long-suffering that she'd been perfecting since approximately age 8. He made the call on the bus. I need everything you have on Stephen Clark. Current. Last 2 years. company records, financial filings for Sentinel, anything that shows who's funding them. That's going to take more than an hour. I've got until tonight, but I need whatever you can get." He lowered his voice. The bus was mostly empty, but habit was habit. "And I need to know if Clark has any board-level connections, investment relationships, consulting relationships, anything that puts him in a room with corporate directors." "You have a specific name?" "George Harris." A pause. "Harris. That name is familiar. He's on Anderson's board." "No, I know him from somewhere else. Private equity. He had a firm in the early 2000s, Harris Meridian Capital." The bus seat was suddenly very hard underneath him. "Say that again." "Harris Meridian Capital, small PE firm. They were involved in a few tech acquisitions around 2012-2013. I'm pretty sure they were a co-investor in a—" The voice stopped. Pause. "Robert. They were a co-investor in the acquisition, the Apex project acquisition." He stopped breathing for a moment. Just a moment. Then everything reorganized itself in his mind, the way a collapsed building reorganizes itself when you finally find the load-bearing wall that failed. Harris was in the acquisition. He had access to the Apex framework through his investment stake. He wouldn't have had direct access to the source code. He wouldn't have needed direct access. He had enough position to know what was in the acquisition, to know that the framework existed, to know who had built it. Robert's voice was very quiet now, and he had enough influence to make sure that when someone accessed those files, the logs showed my name. "This is bigger than Clark. I know. Robert, if Harris is involved at the board level and he has a financial interest in the breach succeeding, you are standing in the middle of something that is federal level. This isn't a corporate security incident. This is—" "I know what it is. Keep going on the Clark research. Send me whatever you find." He hung up, looked out the window of the bus at the neighborhood moving past, the streets he'd learned, the blocks he could walk in the dark, the city that was his because he'd chosen to make it his instead of going back to the world that used to hold him. He thought about Harris sitting in that conference room chair with his coffee, completely comfortable, completely certain that the man across the table was either going to be intimidated or manipulated into a direction that served him. He thought about the 6 years Harris had sat on Jennifer's board, watching her company grow, waiting for the moment when the numbers were right, when the investment in a $140 million development cycle made the risk of an inside job worth taking. He thought about Rebecca, unexpectedly, not with grief, just with the clear, clean certainty of love that doesn't require the person to be present anymore. She would have told him to be careful. She would have also told him that being careful and doing the right thing were not mutually exclusive, and that the only people who acted like they were people trying to talk you out of doing the right thing. The bus stopped. He got off. He walked the 2 blocks to the school. Emily was standing outside the front entrance exactly as predicted, backpack on both shoulders, expression of theatrical long-suffering fully deployed. "You're 7 minutes late." "I know. I'm sorry. I counted. I know you did." He put his arm around her shoulders. They started walking. She leaned into him briefly, the automatic lean, the one she'd been doing since she was small and that she probably didn't even notice she still did, and then straightened back up with the dignity of an 11-year-old who had a reputation to maintain. "How was school?" "Fine. We did fractions. I already knew fractions." "I know you did. Mrs. Peterson said I should be in the advanced math group. What do you think?" "I think the advanced math group has homework on Fridays." She considered this. "But also, I'm bored. That's a real trade-off. What would you do?" He thought about it seriously, because she asked seriously, and she'd been able to tell the difference since she was 6 years old. "I'd take the challenge. Being bored is its own kind of hard." She thought about it. "Okay." The way she said okay when she'd already made the decision and just wanted to hear him confirm it. "Dad?" "Yeah. You seem like you're thinking about something." "I'm always thinking about something. Something big." Her voice was matter of fact. "You get this specific face." He looked down at her. What specific face? Like you're doing math in your head, but the math is about people. He laughed. A real laugh. The kind that caught him off guard because the description was so accurate it was almost uncomfortable. That's a very perceptive thing to say. I know. She was quiet for half a block. Then, is everything okay? Everything is fine. And then, because she could also always tell when he was giving her the edited version. There's something at work I'm trying to figure out, but I'm going to figure it out. Okay. The real okay. The trusting one. Can we get tacos? Yeah, we can get tacos. They got tacos. They sat at the small table in the kitchen of the apartment with the thin walls, and Emily talked about fractions, and Mrs. Peterson, and a girl in her class named Sophie who had said something either brave or reckless at recess, depending on how you looked at it. And Robert listened with the full, undivided attention that he had made the central commitment of his parenting, because the world would give her plenty of people who were physically present and mentally elsewhere. And he had decided a long time ago that he was not going to be one of them. After dinner, Emily did her homework at the kitchen table. Robert sat across from her with his old laptop and worked. His contact had sent the Clark files. He went through them carefully, building a map in a document that existed only in his head, the kind of map that didn't need to be written down because he would not forget a single note of it. Clark had founded Sentinel Security Group in 2018 with initial funding from 2 investors. One was a small tech sector venture fund. The other was a private holding company called HMC Advisors. He searched HMC Advisors. It was a Delaware LLC, registered in 2016, principal office in New York. The registered agent was a law firm, standard practice for anonymizing ownership. But the HMC initials, combined with the timeline, combined with what his contact had told him about Harris Meridian Capital, formed a picture that he didn't need a magnifying glass to see. Harris had funded Clark's firm, which meant Harris hadn't just used the audit as an opportunity. He had constructed the audit. He had created Sentinel Security Group, installed Clark as its face, and then positioned the firm to win the Anderson Technologies engagement. He'd had the inside escort in place, had ensured Clark got the access he needed, and had built in the Apex frame around Robert as a contingency that would, if necessary, redirect any investigation away from himself and toward a man who had conveniently showed up inside the building. Except Robert had found the process in 3 seconds on a Tuesday morning, and now the clock was running in a different direction. Emily went to bed at 9:30. He kissed the top of her head, turned off the light, sat in the kitchen in the quiet that came after she fell asleep, the specific quiet of a small apartment when its only noisy element has gone still. His phone rang. Jennifer. It moved. He sat up straight. When? 8 minutes ago. David flagged it. The process changed behavior. It started generating an outbound signal. He contained it. He tried. He partially redirected it, but he didn't stop it completely before it pushed a packet. How much got through? He thinks a small data payload, maybe 30 seconds of activity log data. Nothing structural, but it got out. Her voice was tight but controlled. Someone knows the process has been touched. Did David trace the outbound address? He's working on it. He's got a partial, enough to narrow it to a specific network range, not enough to pin an endpoint. Send it to me. Robert. Jennifer, send it to me. I can work with a partial address in ways David's standard tools can't. A pause. Then the data came through. A string of numbers on his text, the partial IP, and the behavior log David had captured. He opened his laptop and started working. Emily was asleep 12 feet away. The refrigerator hummed. The city outside was doing what cities did at 9:30 at night. Indifferent and continuous. He worked for 50 minutes. His hands remembered the keyboard the way a musician's hands remembered an instrument, without his permission, with a fluency that bypassed whatever intellectual reluctance he carried. He traced the partial address through 3 proxy layers. Patient work. Methodical work. The kind that required you to stay with it when it went cold and not force it when you didn't have enough yet. He found the endpoint at 10:22. It was a server registered to a data management company in Chicago. The company's client list wasn't public. But the registered address for the company's principal office matched an address in the River North neighborhood of Chicago that also showed up when he cross-referenced it as the business address for a private wealth management operation called Harris Capital Group. He stared at the screen. He had it. Not all of it. Not the financial trail, not the full operational picture, not the documented chain of authority that a prosecutor would need. But he had the thread, and he had pulled it all the way from Jennifer's laptop on the 42nd floor to George Harris's private server in Chicago. And he had the access logs with the false credential, and he had the contractor badge records, and he had 11 years of documented professional connection between Clark and Harris, running through a holding company built on the initials of a defunct private equity firm. He called Jennifer. She answered before the first ring finished. "I have an address. It traces to Harris." The silence on her end was the kind that fills up with a person restructuring everything they thought they knew. "I need it all in writing. Everything. Tonight. I'll have it to you by midnight." "Robert." Her voice was different. Not the CEO voice, not the scalpel, something underneath that. "If this is what it looks like, if he's been on my board for 6 years, sitting in those rooms, I know. How do I trust my own judgment after something like this?" He thought about that, not as a reflex, but as a real question, because she'd asked it as a real question. You trust it because your judgment isn't what failed. He's a sophisticated man who built a sophisticated deception over years. That's not a failure of perception. That's a successful crime. He paused. What you do now is what matters. She was quiet for a moment. "You could have walked away this morning. She stopped. "When I spoke to you the way I did, you could have walked away." "I know. Why didn't you?" He thought about the framework in the system, the thing built from his work, used without his consent, pointing at him like an accusation. He thought about the specific satisfaction of doing the thing you were built to do after years of doing other things. He thought about Emily asleep in the next room, and Rebecca's eyes, and the weight of a life that didn't always go the way you planned, but took you sometimes exactly where you needed to be. Because it was the right thing to do, and those don't come along as often as they should. He could hear her exhale. "Thank you. Get some sleep after you finish this. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." He hung up, pulled his laptop back to the center of the table, and started writing. He finished writing at 12:47 in the morning. The document was 11 pages, clean, precise, organized the way his mind organized things, not chronologically but structurally. Each piece of evidence connected to the next by the logic of its relationship rather than the order in which he'd found it. The Apex framework, the false credential access, Clark's founding of Sentinel, funded through Harris's holding company, the physical data center intrusion 63 days ago using a cloned contractor badge while the real contractor was recovering from knee surgery, the outbound signal, the partial IP trace, the endpoint resolving to a server at Harris's Chicago address, all of it documented, sourced, with the original files attached as exhibits. He read it through once, made 2 small corrections. Then he sent it to Jennifer. He sat for a moment in the kitchen, quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Down the hall, Emily breathed in the slow, even rhythm of deep sleep. He closed the laptop, put his hands flat on the table, just sat with the silence for a while. The way you sit with something after it's done, before the next thing starts. Then he went to bed. He was back on the 42nd floor at 8:29 the next morning. He had not taken the bus. Jennifer had sent a car, which had appeared outside his building at 7:55 with a driver who did not make conversation and a back seat that was warm and quiet. He had sat in it and watched the city move past, and thought about the fact that 24 hours ago he had been pushing a squeaky-wheeled cart through this building's service corridor. and that the distance between that moment and this one was not as large as it appeared from the outside, because he was still the same man in the same life, making the same choices. The setting had shifted. The essential thing had not. Amanda met him in the lobby, not the service entrance, the main lobby, glass and marble and the particular architecture of importance. She handed him a visitor badge. "She's ready for you," and walked him to the elevator with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who had been told to make this happen smoothly and was doing exactly that. The 42nd floor was different this morning, quieter than usual, but with a quality of quiet that was charged rather than empty. The quiet of people who knew something was happening and had been told to stay out of the way of it. Jennifer's office door was open. She was inside, and she was not alone. There were two other people in the room, a man and a woman, both in dark suits, both with a specific posture of federal law enforcement that Robert had encountered enough times in his previous life to recognize without needing to see the badges. He saw the badges anyway, briefly, when Jennifer turned to acknowledge his arrival. "Robert, these are Special Agents Jessica Rodriguez and Michelle Harris, FBI Cyber Division. They've been reading your report for the last hour." Agent Rodriguez was compact and precise, the kind of person who didn't waste motion. "Mr. Williams, we have some questions." "I expected you would." He sat down, without being asked, because the chair was there and his back ached slightly from the kitchen table the night before, and he had reached the age where he no longer stood on ceremony when sitting was available. They went through the report methodically. Rodriguez asked most of the questions. Harris took notes on a tablet and occasionally asked for clarification on technical points. She had a background in network security herself, Robert could tell, because her clarifying questions were precise in the way that only someone who understood the underlying architecture could be precise. He answered everything directly. He showed them the original access logs his contact had sent. He walked them through the IP trace step by step, including the methodology he'd used to work through the proxy layers. At one point, Rodriguez leaned back. "You did this from a personal laptop, last night, after hours?" "Yes." "In your kitchen?" "Yes." Rodriguez and Harris exchanged a look. It was not a skeptical look. It was the look of two people filing something away. "The endpoint trace. The server registered at the Harris Capital Group address in Chicago. You're confident in the methodology. You can replicate it." "I documented every step. If it holds up when you run it with your resources, then it holds up." "It held up." Rodriguez's voice was simple. "We ran it at 6 this morning." Robert nodded. "Mr. Williams." Rodriguez's tone shifted. "I want to ask you directly about the Apex access logs, your credential appearing in those records." "Go ahead." "You understand that on paper, before your analysis, those logs represent the most direct trail of evidence in this case." "I understand." "And you came forward with your report knowing that?" "Yes." Rodriguez studied him for a moment. "Why?" Robert looked at her. "Because the alternative was doing nothing, and I'm not capable of doing nothing when I know what I know." Another look between Rodriguez and Harris. "The false credential documentation you provided, combined with the device signature analysis, our forensics team considers it conclusive. The access event didn't originate with you. We're treating the logs as evidence of identity fraud, not evidence of your involvement." Harris said it plainly, without drama, just information. "I wanted you to hear that clearly." "Thank you." Jennifer was standing by the window during all of this, listening without speaking, the way she listened when she was letting other people do the work that was theirs to do. When Rodriguez and Harris finished their questions and stood to leave, she walked them to the door, said something quietly that Robert didn't catch, then came back and sat across from him. "They're picking up Clark this morning. Chicago office is executing a search warrant on the server facility concurrently." "And Harris?" "He's in the building right now, 39th floor, in the secondary boardroom. He asked for a meeting with me this morning. Routine, he said. Follow-up from yesterday's board session." She said it with an evenness that cost her something. He could see that it did. "He doesn't know. Are they moving on him today?" "The agent said they need the Chicago search to come back first. Couple of hours." She looked at her desk. "So he's down there right now waiting for me. And I have to go sit across from him and conduct a normal business meeting and not—" She stopped. "And not let him see it. I've been in hard rooms before. I've negotiated against people who were trying to destroy me, and I've done it with a straight face." Her voice didn't break, but it bent slightly, the way voices bent when they were carrying something heavy. "But those people weren't sitting on my board. Those people hadn't been in my home at holiday dinners." Robert didn't try to fix that. There was nothing to fix, and she didn't need fixing. She needed what she was doing right now. 30 seconds to feel the weight of it before she picked it back up and carried it with both hands. "You'll be fine in that room." She took a slow breath. "I know." She straightened, picked up her phone, put it back down. "David asked to see you this morning, before you leave." "I figured. He's not involved in this. I'm certain of that now. He told Harris you were working here because Harris asked him directly in the elevator after the board meeting, and David saw no reason not to answer. He didn't know why Harris was asking. He didn't know what he was giving away." "Okay." She looked at him for a moment, the way she'd looked at him several times in the last 24 hours, like a puzzle she'd mostly solved but hadn't fully finished yet. "What do you want to do? After this? Today? Going forward?" "I haven't thought that far ahead." "I have. I've been thinking about it since yesterday afternoon." She leaned forward slightly. "I need a head of security architecture, not for the public-facing systems, for the core infrastructure, the layer underneath everything, the layer that somebody just spent 63 days trying to compromise." She paused. "The person who does that job needs to think the way you think. They need to understand what an attack looks like from the inside before it looks like anything from the outside. And they need to be someone I can trust completely, which is a shorter list than it was yesterday." He looked at her. The light through the window behind her was the flat, clear light of a March morning, and the city outside was doing what it always did, indifferent to the particular weight of this particular moment in this particular room. He thought about the cart in the service corridor downstairs, the squeaky left wheel, the rhythm he'd learned to live inside. He thought about 7 months on this floor, invisible, doing work that needed to be done by someone and was therefore done by him. He thought about the letter folded up in the back of his chest, the one he'd never thrown out, the first chapter of his life, the one he'd set down when Emily needed him whole. She was 11 now. She was on the honor roll. She had her mother's eyes and his stubbornness. And she was going to be, he knew this with a certainty that lived in his bones, someone remarkable. And she had had 6 years of a father who was completely present, who made her tacos and caught her theatrical long-suffering face and listened to her talk about fractions and Sophie's reckless bravery at recess. He had done that right. He was sure of that. He was also sure, and this was the thing he'd been sitting with since yesterday morning, since the moment his hands had found the keyboard again and everything in him had come awake like a room where someone had just turned on all the lights. That being present for Emily and being who he actually was were not, and had perhaps never been, mutually exclusive. He'd told himself they were, because it was easier than finding out if they weren't. "What are the hours?" Something in Jennifer's expression shifted. Not relief exactly, but a kind of settling. "Reasonable ones. I'm not interested in burning through the people who work for me. I've done the math on that model and it doesn't work." She paused. 4 o'clock is 4 o'clock. Non-negotiable. Your words, I believe they were. Then they still are. She held his gaze. "What do you say?" "I'll need 2 weeks to give Donald proper notice." She almost smiled. "Donald will survive." "Donald deserves notice. He's not a bad man. He's just bad at wheels." This time she did smile. It was a real one, brief but genuine, the kind that arrived without permission and left quickly, but was fully present for the moment it was there. It changed her face in a way that the composed executive face didn't prepare you for. 2 weeks. That's fair. He stood. I'll go find David. She was already back on the phone before he reached the door. Amanda, I need the physical access logs for the data center, last 90 days, and get Donald from facilities on the phone.